All right, let's get started. So hello everyone, my name is David Rock. I'm at the University of Maryland in Baltimore, Maryland, and welcome to CytometryInR. So one of the responses we got on our first community feedback form was a request to do a video walkthrough explaining what are we supposed to do when it comes to every week. We need to sync our fork, we need to pull the data locally, we need to copy that data that's local to a new project repository so that we don't interfere with the actual process of bringing in the data next week. So we had tried to do this through a series of screenshots, but it was still not particularly useful. So we're just going to do a walkthrough of what this would look like on my end so that you are able to replicate those steps on yours as well. So let's get started. So as you can see, I'm currently on my GitHub. So you can see this is my GitHub user account. This is my forked version of the CytometryInR course folder. And as you can see, I have not updated this in a while. I'm currently 37 commits behind the actual course repository. If we go ahead and check on it, if I click on the actual commits, you can see last actual change that I had on my own version of the fork was back in February 22nd. So a lot has changed on the course since this day. So what you actually need to do on a daily basis when you're coming back in each week and bringing in new data is on this page here, you see you have an option to sync the fork as long as there's been no changes to the repository affecting your ability to bring in the new set. So this is what you should be seeing, and this is what your goal is. So you're going to come over here and select the sync fork option. It's going to tell you that you're out of date. You can do the compare, which basically just showed you the last screen we just saw. But what you really need to do to sync the fork is to hit this updated branch option. So once we hit updated branch, it ends up committing. It brings in all those changes that have occurred. So you can now see instead of being last actual change that was present was February 22nd, the last change was when I updated the website and slides just about an hour ago from when this was recorded. So at this point on your GitHub account, everything is now synced. You have the most recent version of the data, which we can see if we go under course. You can check to see we are now at week 9. There's it was the functions class. We can check under data and we can see our particular FCS files for the cell count showcase were actually there. So this is everything set up that we will actually need to be able to copy when it comes to using it on our own local instrument, our own local computers. So now that we have synced our version of the CytometryInR course folder, we need to bring this from just being remote online on our GitHub and actually bring it into our local computer. So now that this has been done here on GitHub, let's just go ahead and close out of this browser and let me open up Positron. And as you can see, this is my current version locally. So if we go under our source tab and check, you can see this was pull request issue cleanup. It's still showing up as the February 22nd version. So if this is the old version, it has not yet brought in the newly synced data that we can then have be available on our actual computers. So when you are actually going to go ahead and do a pull to bring in the data from the remote from GitHub, you need to make sure you're down here on the source control tab. Oftentimes you'll be up here under default for the Explorer window. So make sure you click down here to source control. And then right next to changes, there's these 3 little dots. You'll click on these 3 little dots. And these are the options that you'll see to be able to pull in the data locally. So you're going to select this little pull option here. You can also do it via the terminal if you prefer to do git pull. But for those of you who prefer the graphical user interface, this is the example here. So let's go ahead and do the pull option. And as you can see, it's going to GitHub. It's pulling in data. And it's going to take a little bit just because this was February 22nd, which was the last update. That's been quite a few weeks with quite a few FCS files, so let's just give this a couple minutes to be able to proceed. Alright, took a little bit. We can edit that in post-editing. But as you can now see, if we go look at our little graph within our source control, we can see the last change was an hour ago from when we recorded this video, so April 14th, 9:38. So at this point, we're still within the source control tab, but if we come back up here to Explorer, we can now go under Course, and then under Course to whatever week we're particularly doing this time. So this is week 9. And then under Data Table, you can see we have our SCS files that are what we're actually interested in when it comes to being able to run the lines of code that we have present within the index folder over here. So this is the index view. It's basically what generates out the website. So if you're seeing the website and you're copying and pasting, you're basically just running those same lines of code that are present within this code chunk. So these data here is what we're going to need to be able to transfer out. So the main reason I'm emphasizing not working within this project folder here for your local fork version is, let's say you end up creating a couple new files that are located right here, and then you save them, put them into a commit. Now you are no longer following the same cycle when you're looking at the commit messages. Instead of tracking exactly with all the commits that are present from the course, you're now on a little parallel branch, which can cause some issues, as many of us who are trying to submit the homeworks under the old protocol were encountering, where you're getting merged conflict issues, which are just generally a pain to deal with. So as much as possible, always just bring in the data to the CytometryInR folder, but always just go ahead and copy those over to your own working project so that way you're not running into this potential conflicts. So how do you go about creating a new weekly project folder? Well, there's two options. You can create one in GitHub, or you can start one from scratch. I'll go ahead and do the new folder from template for now. In this case, CytometryInR course. We're going to do an R project. Let's go ahead and hit next. If you're following the course organization scheme, this is week 9, so we could do like week 9, follow along, code along, something like that for your week, your project repository. I will normally save mine under my documents folder, so I'm just going to go ahead and switch over to documents, hit OK. And then the most important thing is we want to be able to track with version control, so let's go ahead and hit that little initialize Git repository tab we see there. And at that point we can hit next. And we don't need to mess anything with reproducible environments. The default R version is the one that works fine for me right now. I have 4.5 tree in my system currently, and I can hit create. And let's just go ahead and open this within the current window. So now that we're within our new project repository, we can just do some of those organizations things we saw during the pre-course walkthrough, just to make our lives a little bit easier. I will often just go ahead and create data. I'll create an images folder, and as you can see, it'll just kind of like default output to here. So I'm just going to copy and drag it down, so I have two separate folders. And I always like to go ahead and create a file. Let's call this walkthrough.qmd. I'll drag it out of images out to the general folder structure. Since this is a QMD file, let's just give it a little bit of a YAML. So this will be title week 9, code walkthrough. And format, let's keep this as HTML. Close out the YAML. And just a little bit line. This is my initial QMD file. And let's show in the code block for good measure. Alright, so now that we're coded, this is working properly. Let's just go ahead and hit save. So as we saw a little bit back in the pre-course walkthrough, all this is happening individually in this new repository. We haven't actually staged it. So all these are just locally here. They're not actually going to be tracked by version control. One thing we always want to be able to do is be able to track and revert back if need be. So let's just go ahead and take all these files that have changed and go ahead and stage them. And then once we have them staged, we can write an initial commit message. So this is initial folder setup for week 9. I can hit commit, and this is now present. Now, the main thing we need to do is we can go ahead and publish the branch. This pushes it to GitHub. When I hit publish branch, it's going to give me two options. I can make this public or I can make this private. Let's just go ahead and keep it private. I see most of the people for the course are currently doing it this manner. Also, you don't necessarily need to share all the code, especially if it's just something you're walking through. So set this for private. This gets published to my GitHub, which if I open up, let's just say open for this one. And it didn't quite open up where I expected it to, so give me 1 second here. If I go back to my repo, I check over here, you can see week 9 has now been sent in, and I have the files in question. So this is now backed up online in case I need it in the future. Alright, so this is set up with the initial scheme, but let's go ahead and grab the actual files of interest. So as you can see, we're currently within our weekly project folder, so week 9. We need to go back to the CytometryInR fork. So let's go ahead and click there. And something I didn't know at the very start of CytometryInR is you can just go ahead and click here and scroll down with the shift to copy them all. Obviously, Positron doesn't really know what to do with .fcs files. It's very similar to most bioinformaticians. They don't know what to do with the format. So let's just go ahead and copy. And now that we have it copied within this folder, we can then navigate back here and go over to that recently opened week 9 repository we just created. This is where we had left off. And as you can see, we can now just go ahead and hit paste. And sure enough, we now have our data set available. So let's just go ahead and check that just to make sure. So the working environment is basically this upper level. So as we create our file path, we need to specify the level below is data. This is going to be storage location. And we're just going to list that files in the storage location. Pattern is equal to .fcs. And we want the full file path. Full that means is equal to true. If I can spell true, there we go. Did I misspell something? Didn't run the entire line. There we go. So as you can see, we now have access to the actual files that we need. Everything's set up within our data folder. This entire organization scheme is good. I should go ahead and save my walkthrough. And now the last step before you would actually do the first steps of the course is just basically all these files are now set up. They're all ready to go. Let's just go ahead and send them back to GitHub for version control so that if something happens to our computer mid walkthrough, we're not actually losing anything important. So once again, these are not yet committed, so we need to go ahead and stage them. So I'll just go ahead and select the little plus sign. They all get added from just changes that are present to changes that are being tracked. Now that they're saved here, let's go ahead and write a little commit message. So added the FCS files for week 9 dataset. And one thing to remind everybody is these files we're using in the course are the very slimmed down version of .scss files. GitHub will only accept anything that's smaller than 5 megabytes. So if you have a file that's bigger than that, it's going to complain at you. There's a cutoff where it's just going to say it's too large. So if you try to do this with a full-size spectral flow cytometry file, it may not get as far. But now let's just go ahead and make our commit. As you can see under this graph, we're now one commit ahead of where the GitHub branch is. So at this point, we just need to sync it just to make sure they're now tracking each other, which we can do by clicking here. And now at this point, we have our two commits made in our local repository. We got the data set that we actually need present here. So we're all set to go with what we do for the actual course each week. We can also go ahead and go back and double check on GitHub. And sure enough, let's hit refresh. And you can see we now have our data folder with the actual contents. So this is the walkthrough of what we will typically do at the start of every class, just to make sure you have the updated data sets, you have the updated code, and that you're actually able to use them. While we're here, I'll also go ahead and show you what has been useful for many people in the class, for those who are attending in person, when it comes to actually working with their lines of code. So one thing they will often do is they'll have the CytometryInR course. Go ahead and open that one up. Open up the course website. And if, for example, like today, as they're working through week 9 material, they will like come in, hover over the particular code that they actually want to copy it, and then they'll just have to navigate backwards to positron. And then at that point here, just create a new code block. Paste it in. So that way you're not worrying so much about typos. Typos are still important for the learning process. It's how you learn how to troubleshoot your code, but this is one easier way rather than having to write things out continuously, especially for some of those more complicated code blocks. Obviously, you could also go back to the original file in the index.qmd, but this is just some things that have been a little bit easier for those attending in person. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. I hope this walkthrough is helpful. And shout out to those who filled out the community feedback form, number 1, who requested it. There was multiple people who suggested it as something that was a point of confusion. So I appreciate the feedback, and here's a little video for you. And with that, I hope you have a good rest of your evening, and I will see you throughout the rest of the week on the discussions page, and next week as we start talking downsampling concatenation.